Everywhere you look in my background, you'll find people who despise America and want to transform it radically. Americans often wonder, why am I so comfortable with anti-American extremists? And why are they so comfortable with me? People also wonder why I polarize America at home.
Average income of the top 1%, the breathtaking greed of a few,
And apologize abroad.
There have been times where America's shown arrogance.
Well, you'll understand as I tell you about the dreams from my real father. My real father was communist Frank Marshall Davis. He was a card-carrying member of Communist Party USA, card number 47544. He was a Marxist and staunch supporter of Uncle Joe, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. I am what's known as a red diaper baby, the child of a Communist Party USA member. My real father was a communist organizer in Chicago and Hawaii, as well as a talented writer and poet.
Frank Marshall Davis, writer.
The FBI had Frank Marshall Davis under surveillance for 19 years, compiling a 600-page FBI file. I have my mom's long chin, but many features are from my real father. My eyes, brow, nose, and lips. My smile, my body and stature, and my build. We're both 6'2", and my deep voice.
Joined together many times to counteract what is going on and the attitudes of whites.
We both smoke. Like my real father, as I get older, age spots are showing up. I look more like him every day. Even if you find this hard to believe, you'll see that Frank Marshall Davis was my ideological father, beginning with my formative teenage years. He taught me the doctrines of Karl Marx, embedding me with the ideology of class struggle that he said would one day bring a dictatorship of the proletariat to America. By the time I was 18, Frank Marshall Davis's worldview became mine. And my mission in life was to fulfill his dreams.
My father was a foreign student, born and raised in a small village in Kenya. He grew up herding goats. My father grew up herding goats in Kenya.
I know. I sold myself to America as the multicultural ideal.
With a father from Kenya, a mother from Kansas, and a story...
Typical white folks from Kansas moved to Hawaii, where my mother married an African student, a loving family separated only by the Kenyan's desire for a Harvard education. But the rock upon which I built my political career was only a fairy tale. To get elected, I systematically misled the American people.
My father was from Kenya, from Africa.
In order to obscure my true political foundations. I don't fancy myself a liar, but the dreams from my real father, changing America by replacing capitalism with socialism, far outweigh any obligation to tell the truth.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
Look, my election was not a sudden political phenomenon. It was the culmination of an American socialist movement that my real father, Frank Marshall Davis, nurtured in Chicago and Hawaii, and has been quietly infiltrating the U.S. economy, universities, and media for decades.
We are the ones we've been waiting for.
This is the story I would have told if I were being honest with you. Now, let me introduce you to my real father, Communist Frank Marshall Davis, and his dreams. Three years after the Bolshevik Revolution, the American Communist Party was founded in Chicago by journalist John Reed. For the next 60 years, CPUSA received funding and orders from Moscow, which it implemented without question. In 1930s Chicago, CPUSA targeted journalists for recruitment because of their ability to spread Soviet influence in American public opinion. My real father, Frank Marshall Davis, was one of them. A graduate of Kansas State Journalism School, he joined the Communist Party and began writing for the Chicago Star. During his 20 years in Chicago, my father wrote for all the communist publications and was deeply involved in an astounding number of communist front organizations. Frank Marshall Davis was assigned by CPUSA to recruit blacks into the movement. My father authored 3 major volumes of poetry.
I was known as a realist. I wrote about whatever I felt, hitting as hard as I could.
Many poems were political, which often contained proletarian messages. He believed all poetry was propaganda.
Take it then from the careless fists of the money drunk. Place it in the reaching hands of the little people.
As a Marxist, many of his poems were anti-religious.
Your tales about Jesus of Nazareth are no go with me. Grace is a Dixie nigger.
My father was an avid photographer. While in Chicago, he started a camera club.
The Lens Camera Club. I have to have been president of it.
He specialized in nude photography. My father also wrote columns on jazz and was a DJ for a jazz radio station.
I was involved with the Abraham Lincoln School. This was a progressive school.
Chicago's Abraham Lincoln School was a communist-run training school. My father was on the board of directors. He helped write the Marxist curriculum and lectured on American imperialism, colonialism, and jazz. He met his wife at the school, a white socialite, 18 years his junior, who was also a CPUSA member. By World War II, Communist Party USA had grown to thousands of members, all loyal Soviet patriots. Some became spies and stole America's plans for atomic weapons. helping to ignite the Cold War.
Well, you know, I had an FBI agent who had been my personal agent.
The FBI began tracking my father in 1944. He was placed on Security Index A, meaning he would be immediately arrested in the event of war with the Soviet Union. U.S. naval forces in Hawaii were an obstacle to Soviet expansion in Asia. So in 1948, the Kremlin ordered CPUSA to facilitate a U.S. withdrawal from the islands. CPUSA assigned Frank Marshall Davis to Honolulu, where he began writing for the communist newspaper, the Honolulu Record. In his frankly speaking columns, he flawlessly mirrored official Soviet propaganda. He blamed American capitalism for starting World War II, denounced the Marshall Plan, and demonized President Truman as a fascist colonialist warmonger itching to launch World War III. He preached government health care, wealth redistribution, nationalization of industry, and bashed Wall Street. Anyone opposing socialism was KKK, a white supremacist.
Crisis in Honolulu, caught like the rest of Hawaii in the paralyzing grip of a dockman's strike.
I met all of the ILWU top brass.
My father helped organize the communist-controlled International Longshore and Warehouse Union. In 1949, they mounted a strike aimed at taking control of the island. It eventually failed after 177 days. As in Chicago, Frank Marshall Davis was given the task of recruiting blacks for the Communist Party. Comrade Frank Marshall Davis suddenly appeared on the scene to propagandize the membership with the purpose of converting it into a front for the Stalinist line, complained Edward Berman of the Honolulu NAACP. The National NAACP revoked the Hawaiian chapter's charter to prevent a communist takeover.
The Eastland Committee, I was under subpoena then to testify.
In 1956, my father was subpoenaed by the Senate Subcommittee on Un-American Activities. When asked about his Communist Party membership, he pleaded the Fifth.
That would indicate that I had been a member of the Communist Party, and I have never told anybody that.
My grandfather was Stanley Dunham. I called him Gramps. He enlisted in the U.S. Army during World War II, and my mother, Stanley Ann, was born while he was away. She was named after him in case he didn't survive the war. Thankfully, he did. In fact, he enjoyed European culture and set his heart on working abroad one day. Gramps was told he needed 1 year of foreign language to qualify for a government job overseas. So he moved the family to Berkeley and studied French. I know, I've told the tale that my grandfather was an extremely restless furniture salesman, traveling the country to find just the right furniture store. That was a cover story. Gramps was a company man, a spook, CIA. After Berkeley, Gramps signed on to Air Force Intelligence, working at Shepherd, then McConnell Air Force Base, before landing a job with the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1953, Gramps was posted to Lebanon as a CIA case officer at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. That's where Mom got her first taste of living in third world countries. And she loved it. Though the family was Methodist, Mom enrolled in Catholic school in Beirut. Collège Notre-Dame de Jamhur, a boys' school which had a co-ed program for foreign students. As the Red Scare deepened in the 50s, Boeing Corporation in Seattle began producing the B-52 Stratofortress, a long-range strategic bomber designed to drop nuclear bombs on Russia.
If colonists are working in our national defense industries for the purpose of sabotaging our preparedness program,
it was critical to U.S. security that the B-52 design plans not fall into the hands of Soviet agents. However, Seattle was home to many CPUSA members. The chairman of Mercer Island School Board, John Stenhouse, admitted to being a communist. Stenhouse taught at Mercer High School in Seattle and was president of the Universalist Unitarian Church. It was so full of commies, they called it the Little Red Church on the Hill. The CIA conducted domestic surveillance on American communists as part of its work aimed at foreign powers. In the fall of 1956, Gramps was assigned to Seattle to monitor CPUSA. The family joined the Unitarian Church, and Mom entered Mercer High School. She was Gramps' cover story. As a teenager, Mom hung out at Seattle coffee shops, listened to jazz, and read beat poetry. Mom was often in conflict with Gramps. She found him oppressive and overbearing. Once, she drove to San Francisco with a friend, on the spur of the moment, just to shock Gramps, who had to fly to fetch her back.
The contest we're engaged in with the communists is a contest for the minds and hearts of people around the world.
In the late 50s, Russia and the United States were competing for influence in emerging African nations. The Russians opened People's Friendship University. In response, the CIA began Operation Airlift Africa to educate African students in the United States. In the summer of 1959, Gramps began commuting from Seattle to Hawaii every 2 weeks for the CIA, as Mom began her senior year. Gramps' job was to oversee the African students and recruit them as future CIA contacts. Arriving in Honolulu from Kenya in August of 1959 was Barack Hussein Obama. That's how he pronounced his name, Barack. He was welcomed at Hickam Air Force Base by none other than my grandfather in a traditional Hawaiian ceremony. Barack Obama's arrival was covered in a local newspaper, where he complained of the unexpected high cost of living. Over the next 9 months, Gramps blended in as a furniture salesman, joined the Unitarian Church, and struck up casual conversations with local communists, including my real father, Frank Marshall Davis. When Mom graduated high school in June of 1960, she was planning on attending the University of Washington in Seattle, along with her large group of teenage friends. She was devastated when Gramps announced the move to Hawaii. He tore her away from her teenage world to an island thousands of miles out in the Pacific Ocean. Hawaii was like a different planet for a kid from Seattle. Mom enrolled at the University of Hawaii, taking only 2 classes in protest. She was miserable and alone, and even worse, an outsider. Whites were just 1/4 of the population. Mom was desperate for friends and seeking revenge for what Gramps had done to her. An interesting black man had visited Gramps at their apartment. He seemed cool. He was a poet and knew all about jazz music. Mom began skipping class, sneaking over to Frank Marshall Davis's house to hang out.
Your lips, sweeter than old wine. Your eyes, more beautiful than April rainbows. I do not love you for just your body.
He read her poetry. He played jazz records for her and showed her his nude photo collection. At some point, she agreed to pose. These photos were taken a few weeks before Christmas 1960, when Mom was about 5 weeks pregnant with Mate. There's no mistaking, this is my mom. The long denim chin, the petite mouth, the arched eyebrows, the earlobes, the thin upturned nose. Frank then sold the photos to men's mail-order catalogs. Now, sometimes Frank had Mom pose with other women. Here, Mom is sitting on the same couch as Frank in this 1948 interview. Mom's recent tan line is visible. And she's wearing Chicago-style high heels belonging to Frank's wife. My father's jazz records are clearly in view. Stan Kenton's Cuban Fire and Nat King Cole's Love is the Thing. My father was also a swinger.
I have a collection of intimate portraits called Horizontal Cameos.
He later wrote an autobiographical sex novel under a pseudonym describing years of sordid sexual encounters, often involving group sex. In Sex Rebel Black, I think he memorialized the encounters with my mom. Anne came up many times the next several weeks. She obtained a course in practical sex from experienced and considerate practitioners. I think we did her a favor, although the pleasure was mutual. I'm not one to go in for Lolitas. Usually I'd rather not bet a babe under 20. But there are exceptions. I didn't want to disappoint the trusting child. Frank Marshall Davis often wrote poems about his conquests.